Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, back in for another edition of Office Hours. Decided to go ahead and get one of these out before I head out of town next week. We've got actually some back-to-back trips coming up, so just wanted to go ahead and get one of these in and see what was going on out in the world and again, answer some questions and just see how everybody's doing. Hopefully things are good. We are, I guess, officially into spring. It's not super hot here, but it's, it's doing all right. Pool is in good condition, and so that's all nice and good. Have a bunch of questions to go through today. I picked out, I think these will be interesting enough to do, but I think before I jump into the questions, want to remind folks of at least one of the trips. So next week, I'm going to be at DevNexus. And I would say if you're anywhere, certainly in the Southeast region, and perhaps, well, actually, it's funny. So DevNexus, it actually bills itself as the largest Java conference in the world. I guess that could be true. I'm not sure. It's going to be my first time there, so maybe I'll find that out for certain. But in any case, it's actually in Atlanta, Georgia, which is pretty easy to get to from most of the US. Next week, April 9th through 11th. So I'll be up there for 3 days in Atlanta. And I mean, it has 14 tracks. There's, I believe, over 150 speakers, maybe, yeah, definitely over 150. So that sounds like a pretty decent sized conference to me. So we'll see for sure. It's not too late to register. If you want to go, you can check out all the information on devnexus.org. And hopefully I'll see you there. If feel free to stop by. The U.S. Postgres Association will have a community booth. I'll be there along with a couple other Postgres folks for a good portion of that time. And hopefully we see you there. So that's my main trip next week. And then actually after that trip, I am going out on a cruise for a friend of the family, so to say. I don't actually know where it's going. It's going out of Cape Port Canaveral. I guess Port Canaveral. It's not SpaceX, so we're not going to the moon. So I assume it's going to the Bahamas. I haven't actually. I just know like get on the boat by this time, and then eventually they will return you from the boat. So hopefully that goes smoothly. I've not been on a cruise in many years. Certainly since before the pandemic. So. I'm hoping that it goes well and it's a good time and all that stuff. So that'll be So back-to-back trips starting next week with DevNexus in Georgia, like I mentioned. So with that said, I guess why don't we go ahead and jump on into the questions, and we'll go from there. This first one I picked it. It seems like an interesting enough question, and again, this is one. I'm not 100% familiar with this, but the question was basically, what is an IIF SQL statement? And I guess, so it's the letters IIF, which stands for immediate if, and it's not. I actually just learned that this is why it jumped out at me. I kind of learned, I guess, or relearned a thing. I was working on a patch for the Postgres core software, and it was just like fixing a comment in the code inside the core software, and there was a IFF in the comments, and I thought that was a typo so I was changing a couple other things, and I saw that, and also thought that was a typo, but in the comments of the core Postgres code, they actually use IFF for if and only if, which is a C construct. So I think it makes sense if you're in the C mindset. And I go back and forth between languages so much that like it didn't strike me as that when I read it. It does make sense in that context, but if by itself also made sense. So anyways, so now the IIF, you might be like, what is that? And if you're a Postgres person, that is a good question. I know SQL Server has this immediate if, and I'm not sure what other databases have this. If you know of other ones that do have it, like again, feel free to comment below. Would be interesting to know. It basically in the Postgres world, if you wanted to do this, it would be essentially like doing a case when statement. And the idea is like, so in or I say in Postgres, but or in ANSI SQL standard syntax, if you're into that kind of thing. So if the simplest thing would be like select case when true, one, else, 1 divided by 0, end. I think that'll parses in my brain, which is basically just saying like, hey, select one, return the number 1 if the statement is true. Otherwise, you would return 1 divided by 0. And in this case, the immediate if, the idea is if it's true, just return that first thing. Don't actually evaluate the second piece of it. And that is how the case one would also evaluate that way. So I think in Postgres, the equivalent would be like a case one statement, and where the first thing is the expected thing to be true. So that's what the IIF statement does, immediate if statement does. So in SQL Server parlance, and who else? I don't think this is part of ANSI standard. I'd be surprised, again, if this is part of ANSI standard. I have seen it. It seems pretty rare. But it would be, like select IIF paren. I guess you need, so true in my case one statement, comma 1 divided by 0, right, is how you would put that together. So it's a little more terse than the case one syntax. So that's fine. People like terseness. But I don't think it's ANSI standard. Otherwise, I would assume Postgres would have it, because I would guess that it's not super difficult to put together. And in fact, you could do it as it'd be pretty easy to write a SQL function that just basically took those arguments in and evaluated them with a case statement inside the SQL of the body of the function. So you could make one of those if you were doing like a SQL compat, like the old MySQL compat library. Then you could easily build one of those. So that is the IIF SQL statement. Again, I don't think it's standard, and as far as I know, the only one that has a SQL Server. Oracle had something pretty similar, but it had a few different things like compared to that. So maybe it does have that in Oracle too. I forget, to be honest. So, but that's the IIF SQL statement. So hopefully that is useful. All right, so next question, I think this one's a little more philosophical. What is the importance of learning about data modeling before studying database management systems and SQL? And this one, I'm going to answer this probably not. I'm not going to directly answer this, I think, the way that the asker wanted. But so to me, the importance of learning, I'm actually going to tell you, like, I actually don't think it is important to learn about data modeling before studying relational databases and SQL. And the reason I say that is I've seen too many people come from too many different angles. I know developers who have started with an ORM and then they start learning actual SQL, right? And then they start looking at the underlying database structure, and then they actually figure out data modeling. Because when they started with the ORM, they were, kind of using an object model, at least in their heads, the way the ORM worked. And so they didn't really understand data modeling and whatnot. And they get into it from a performance perspective. So then you start to learn it. But also, again, I've known people who came from like database hacker background, if you want to call it that, where they were, studying like Postgres internals or studying like the internals of other databases, looking at SQLite and comparing and just going through like sort of classic, if you were going to be a database, developer in the sense of like developing backend relational database or non-relational database code for the actual application service. So people get into it that way, and then eventually they get to data modeling. And then, of course, I've known people who've learned data modeling first, and then get to, learning actual implementations of the practical piece of it and whatnot. So there's too many different ways to come at this to say that you need to learn it first before studying databases and SQL. And again, like, the other part of this is if you go back far enough in time, I think, right, people would learn data modeling before they learned SQL because SQL didn't exist. So, you can definitely learn that without doing SQL. And I do think it's good to learn data modeling at some point, as you're trying to improve yourself and trying to learn how this stuff works. I definitely would say you should try to learn it. So don't get me wrong. And in fact, one of the books I love, it's old. I don't even know if they have it. Probably have it on Amazon. I just assume because Amazon has everything, but I'm not sure it's actually still in print. Was a book called Practical Issues with Database Management touches on topics of data modeling and database management from I would say from a theoretical perspective. It's written by I want to say Fabien Pascal. In fact, I thought I had a copy here on my bookshelf. Just one second. It's not where I thought it would be. So yeah, I don't know. I think I do have a copy. I have a copy of it somewhere for sure. And so I definitely would recommend that book if you can find a copy of it. So yeah, learn data modeling. It's definitely good to do, but I don't think I actually don't even think it's all that important to learn it first. And again, this goes back to, are you good at learning from theory versus learning from like practice and hands-on work? And to me, I think of the first things that got me sort of studying data modeling for reals was actually doing things like Excel spreadsheets and parsing data and whatnot. I did some work with it was a mix of like Excel and Access with some guys that were doing like fantasy sports statistics. So, and what I thought was interesting was the grabbing, downloading the data and then computing all this ancillary information and putting it together based on like sports leagues and that kind of stuff. So that data analytics bit was what was interesting to me, not the data modeling part. But then as you go and you're trying to write, more interesting reports and more complicated stuff, then you sort of get into data modeling and learning what this stuff is all about. So, even for me, like, it's not like I studied data modeling first. And I also think like with data modeling, there's two sides to it that I think are important. And, the second piece of it, which is the practical application. So there's the theoretical bit of data modeling, which again, it's important to learn it. But then I think there's also the practical applicability of building data models and what does it actually mean to do that when you're talking about physical implementations. And that differs based on your queries and based on the database system that you've picked. So, because of that, I would say, you don't have to learn it first. It's great, and you definitely should try to learn it at some point during your journey, but you don't need to learn it first. And if you didn't learn it, that doesn't mean you can't learn it, secondary. So, all right, so that's that one. I feel like it's sort of a similar question. Why do some people find DBMS queries difficult, despite them being based on simple logic? Well, first off, they're not really built on simple logic, so that might be the first reason people find it difficult. You can make arguments that database queries are based on either relational algebra or relational calculus, depending on what you're looking at and what you're trying to do. There's definitely enough stuff on the web to read about that. I think otherwise, so they're not based on simple logic in that sense. And certainly some of them, simple logic doesn't get you to like recursive queries. So part of this is going to be, well, how deep down the query rabbit hole do you want to go? And that will definitely make a difference. And then the other part of it, I think, why is it difficult? It rather than just simple logic. I like that phrase. So some queries are complicated. I think the other part is the thing with SQL queries is it's not only about learning how to get the data out. There's also the piece that is doing it performantly, and those are two kind of different things, because SQL, it's so different from most things that you'll learn if you go to learn programming, where you're actually learning. You could be learning like logic-based stuff, but you're probably going to learn either object-oriented programming or some kind of functional programming or procedural programming, none of which are like how SQL works, right? SQL is really designed with this idea of like you're going to spell out what the query wants, but then the actual process of how to go get it and how to do, the retrieval is up to the database engine to do. And that's how SQL is designed to work. So I think that's, to me, like it's just very different from if you're writing an actual program, whether it's just a bash script or, some Java code or whatever. In either of those cases, you're actually having to spell out, here's how to go do the work, and maybe it's just a different level of abstraction, because one could argue like, you say like in a bash script, you just tell the cat something, right? And you're like, well, you're not telling it to do fopen and read and, print line and all that. Like the underlying stuff is abstracted away. So you're not really telling it how to do that. But yeah, you are, because the cat is not, that's not what the script does, right? Like that's just a piece of it. And you're telling it to go do that work. Whereas in SQL, it's just at a very different level, right? It's a higher level when it comes to that stuff. But then once you actually get the data back, right, and you start doing like the performance troubleshooting and that kind of stuff, you then go and learn the underlying pieces, and you try to figure out, how do I get the computer, right, or the Postgres system, how do I get it to go get the data the way that I want it to go get the data, because it's choosing the wrong way to get the data. So I have to kind of learn by this. And I think that's the part, right? It's the first bit is like your brain kind of needs to think in a different way. It needs to think in sets as opposed to like thinking procedurally or with an object method or however, you kind of wrap that stuff up. So that's the first step. And then, it gets more complicated. And then you also have to be able to switch your mind over into this idea of, now I need it to perform faster, which means I need to actually make sure it's doing the right thing, and shout out to PG Hint Plan, so you can actually see what it's doing and give it hints to see if going the other way is actually better and all that good stuff. So yeah, so that's why, that's why it's difficult, because even the people that ask questions where they say it's simple, like they get the question wrong, like they get it wrong right in asking the question. So, right. All right. Next one. All right. This will get back to the practical, sort of. I feel like this is pretty easy, and there are some good blog posts out there on this one. So how do you speed up insertion from a huge table with Postgres? And so if you're thinking like, if Postgres, is it lots of inserts? Are we doing a big table and then you're going to do like select into? Is this the DBA's job to fix this? Or and I think so. There's a few different ways you can approach this, and it also depends on like where the source is and where the destination is. If you are doing, if you've got a lot of data and you're trying to get it into a database, so I'll first give a shout out. If it's external to the database, look at PG Loader. It's probably like one of the best things you can use as an external tool. The only real downside seems to be it's an external tool. So, you have to kind of go out and get it. But otherwise, like the SQL matters, right? And so you can push back and always say like, well, are they doing individual inserts? And if they're doing individual inserts, have them batch those inserts. It's probably, I guess it would depend on how much data you're putting in, right? Then you would say batch the inserts, and then you would say go to multi-value inserts, I think would be the next fastest. And then it's like go to copy, which would be the next one, or like a select into if the data is already in the database. And if you're doing like transforms and stuff like that in the database, right, you go like copy it into like a temp table. So then you're not actually writing like extra wall and stuff like that. So your write should be faster to get the data in, and then do your transforms, and then do a select into and all that. So try to keep it all within the same transactions. There's just a lot of sort of tips like that. There's nothing magical, like, and all I would say is like there's a split of the work. So the part I wanted to kind of touch on here is there's a split of the work in that the method you use to do the insert is actually probably more important than anything a DBA could do. If you said, I have this process that does, 10,000 inserts, and they're single line inserts, and maybe that's the way it has to be done. Probably isn't, right? You probably could batch that up, but that requires changing the code. If you just go to your DBA and say, I have this, 10,000 insert process that's going to run, I need you to make it faster, like, okay, I'll turn fsync off and it'll be fast. That's not the right answer. But there are things a DBA could do potentially. Turn off or turn on async commits would probably speed that up and probably worth doing. But really what you would say is go back and change the method that you're using. Is probably where the more bang for the buck is than trying to make the DBA do some magic tricks, right? Because where do you draw that line? Like if you said like, well, you could drop all the indexes off of a table for large tables. Like if you look at how PG Restore does, or look at the output of a PG dump, a clean SQL one, right? It's going to create a table, it puts all the data in, and then it builds the indexes. That's typically faster to do it that way. Excuse me. So I think most of the work is probably not on the DBA to do it. Although maybe you would outsource the whole job, right? If it's a batch job or something that you're going to have done more than once, maybe you just have your DBA write that, depending on the nature of your org and the languages involved in all that stuff. So, but otherwise, I would say go back and look at different ways. And again, PG Loader is an external tool. Otherwise, copy is probably best, and then it just kind of multi-value inserts. transactional batches of inserts all the way up. So that's hopefully some help pointing you in the right direction there. And then our fifth and final question of the day, blowing right through here. Can you provide some examples of companies or organizations that use Postgres instead of other databases like Oracle, MySQL, or Mongo in their production environments? Sure, like it's kind of funny that this is still a question that's out there, but I suppose people don't know what they don't know. To me, I think the best example nowadays that I give to folks, honestly, is you point to Amazon, and I think it's a good mix to understand that, when Amazon started, everything they did basically ran on Oracle, and that was just how you did it 25 years ago ish when they got started. And then now you look and the vast majority of their Oracle has been replaced by Postgres, so they're using that. But also they have implemented their own database, Amazon, DynamoDB, right? So they've sort of created their own. And of course, in building out AWS, they've also adopted, like many other databases, into that system, not just for other people, but also for some of the stuff that they do internally. But so what you end up seeing is like they just use a plethora of different databases as whatever the reason, sometimes technical reasons, sometimes political reasons. It is what it is. So but I think that's a good one because they're a large company, everybody knows who they are and what they do, and they understand, okay, this is a company that uses that instead of something like Oracle or MySQL. I don't know. I mean, I would assume probably there is some MongoDB floating around somewhere inside of Amazon. Some product is built on top of Mongo or something that they make use of. That might be less true now since they sort of changed their license and aren't really open source anymore. So, but if it was a product, I suppose it might still get in there that way. I could still see that. So, other than that, I mean, there's a lot of examples. It's expensive for companies to switch though. So, even if you look at like the Amazon example, a good parallel to that, it took them years to start doing these moves from Oracle into Postgres, and a lot of investment on their part. I think a similar thing to look at would be Salesforce, who has toyed. They run the vast majority of their stuff, as far as I know, at least, still runs on Oracle. They have a bunch of MySQL in place now that started, I think, even before the Oracle acquisition of MySQL, or the Sun acquisition of MySQL, which was then later acquired by Oracle, but whatever. But they also, now Salesforce owns Heroku, right? So they run a lot of Postgres in that sense as well. In theory, they're probably looking at how do we reduce our Oracle bill by moving some of this stuff over onto Postgres. But by and large, like I think they're still using Oracle as it is the largest deployed thing inside of Salesforce. So, it's like I said, it's expensive for companies to make these kinds of changes. Takes a very long time, and until the calculus is right, it's kind of like that tipping point idea that eventually it will probably be right, and then they will make the switch, and then it'll happen. But for other companies, I guess the other classic one, for most people, they only know the one half of the story, but Uber is another one that you could point to as like, well, they used Postgres instead of MySQL, and you're like, I thought it was the other way around. And it's like, well, actually, they did both, right? Like, there were some political issues, I would say. They started on MySQL, they switched to Postgres, made a little bit of noise about that, which I think a lot of people don't even know. And then they switched from Postgres back to MySQL. And both of those were, coincidentally, I'm sure it had nothing to do with it. Leadership changes happened, and then like suddenly there was a database change that had to happen. So, whatever. So they have now switched back. So I think companies do this. It's just expensive. So that's why you don't hear about it a lot. But definitely companies do make these kinds of switches. And I think at this point, on the Postgres side, it's used by companies in every industry that's out there. Like whether it's commercial work or oil and natural gas. There's a ton of that. It's in banking and finance, communications, right? All these companies. There's companies that are using Postgres. So definitely, you can find examples of that if you want. And I think if you look on PostgreSQL.org, there's a section on there where used to have testimonials. The thing we really needed was to get these testimonials of users. I think you can still find some of them listed there. It's kind of gone away as far as importance goes, just because now Postgres is just way more ubiquitous than it was 20 years ago. So, but you can still find them if you want to. So, all right, that 5 more questions for you for office hours. That's going to do it for me today. Thanks for joining. Always appreciate it. Like I said, I'll be out of town next week and some of the week after. So we'll see. It might be a couple more weeks before we get to another office hours. Otherwise, hope to see you online. As always, you can find me online. I am still on Twitter. I guess not the last person, but yeah, it is what it is. It's actually funny. I've seen some people seem to be coming back a little bit on Twitter, for better or worse. But in any case, I'm still there. You can follow me at RobTreat2. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm not terribly active, but if you look for Robert Treat on LinkedIn, feel free to follow me there as well. If something really big happens, I'll certainly let you know. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and share if you get use out of this, or someone who's dealing with Postgres and could use either a question answered, or they just want to hear about other people's pain. That's fine too. Group therapy is therapy all the same, so that's cool. Other than that, take care of yourselves, and of course, if you can, take care of your database as well. I'll see you next time.